Episode 48 of two FMA-Nerds talk about stuff. So I brought on Brian Zawilinski. He is one of the masters of Tappy Tappy underneath the late GM Remy Presas, the founder of Modern Arnis. Brian happens to be one of his original students who started training with him when he was like 14, 15 years old and spent a lot of time with him. On top of all that, Brian is the founder of what is called the Legacy Camp, which is a big Modern Arnis camp to help continue on the legacy of GM Remy. He's also a podcast host of the Modern Arnis Roundtable. And on top of all that, he is a 20-year veteran of law enforcement, specifically corrections. He was a captain in corrections. And we actually spent the majority of our conversation today talking about use of force, knife-related stuff, and yeah, the real. So, and if you're into that kind of thing, hang out. We didn't actually talk about FMA until like later in the episode, but overall, this is a great conversation. I'm going to have him on later, again and again and again, because he's got a big brain full of experience, and yeah, he's a really cool dude to talk to. So, enjoy the episode. Share and like, subscribe, do all the things for marketing, and yeah, see you later. Well, here we are, and good morning.
Good morning.
So, for the sake of my guests here, could you tell me, or tell my guests here and tell my audience who you are, a little story as to where you came from, and then we'll get into the weeds from there on.
Came from my mother.
Yes, this is going to be one of those.
Did you want to go that far back or no?
I mean, so the way this podcast works is I'm all about doing the biographical stories of the people who make up FMA. Because if you're an FMAer, you kind of should already know your FMA history. So I'm more about getting to know the people who are in current, who are the living body of FMA and help provide the future, this beautiful legacy and tapestry that of a thing that we love. But that starts by let's get to know the people, because we should already know the stories of our GMs and professors and whom and whatever. So anyways, here we are.
Amen. Born and raised here in Connecticut, central Connecticut. Started in the arts in July of '81 in Tracy Kenpo in a local school. And oh boy, 6 months later, my American instructor, Professor Lee Lowery, met Grandmaster Presas. And those two hit it off and became thick as thieves very, very quickly. My instructor, Professor Lee, Sifu Lee at the time, was a natural athlete and had an innate gift in the arts. And if you have ever seen any of the footage from Grandmaster Presas from the 80s, you'll see a husband and wife. You may not know that they're husband and wife, but Jim and Judy Clapp wearing black with red trim, and then a very large black guy also wearing all black. That's Lee Lowery. And, I can sum it up in one sentence from Grandmaster Presas. He would call him Sipu, S-I-P-U, because of his language. He said, Sipu Lee, my God, I show him once and he can do it. No one can do that. So they hit it off really well. So I had a front row seat to not only an amazing American instructor, but at 14 years old, met the formidable Remy Presas. Spent the next, almost 20 years with both of them. Of course, we lose Professor Presas in August of '01. My God, I was 14 years old when I met him. I couldn't even drive to a seminar yet. So as the years went by and I started gaining more independence, started driving and then obviously flying to see him. He came to New England quite often because of those willing to bring him in. Everywhere from Philly you had Michael Bates and Joe Bridenstine, and Dennis Tostin in Philly, Jim and Judy in Delaware, all the way up to Connecticut. And then in Massachusetts, you had the Valley Women's Group, Valley Women's Martial Arts, Wendy Dragonfire and Janet Alfs, bringing him in. They were the first real connection to him here on the East Coast. And then Richard Roy took over the summer camp for about 13 years, the Massachusetts summer camp. A couple people, one in Maine. He made a not so frequent appearance in some of the other New England states, a couple times in Mass. Lauren Therian would bring him into either Mass or Rhode Island. So it was very easy access to the professor on my end throughout the 80s, because he was coming to this neck of the woods so frequently. And then as I got older, I started following him. In short, Professor Lowery eventually retired from the arts, and is living in the Carolinas, and kept following Professor Presas until the end. And none of us saw it coming. I think he was teaching the 12 strikes, and he was screwing the count up. And Gabi Roloff, he was in Germany when this happened, and she's like, "What the heck is this?" So off they go to the hospital. They assess him, stabilized him, however that means, got him home to Victoria, and that's when he went under surgery for his brain tumor. And he lasted 10 months. And I'm no doctor, but a grade 4 brain tumor is what he had. It's called a glioblastoma. It's basically terminal, but you may get a few more months, but it's pretty much about as terminal as you can get other than a grade 5 tumor. So he recovered in Victoria, British Columbia. And unfortunately, they knew it was going to come back, and it did. And we lost him August 28th. That said, I wound up inheriting the summer camps from Massachusetts because the host decided to step down. So I've been running the camps since 2021. Well, 2022 was my first camp, because our last one together we had one camp without the professor in 2001. And I took them over in 2022. And like many other people out there, we're just trying to further the art, evolve, learn. He did not leave us a magic scroll or a secret scroll. He gave us the whole art, and we've been unraveling it ever since. And some really interesting things are happening in Modern Arnis, but we can get to that when you're ready. But just been keeping busy the whole time. I chose not to make a primary career out of the arts. I went into corrections, and I think I came out relatively unscathed. Did 27 years, but if you want to talk in terms of 8-hour days, it was more than 30 because there was so much overtime. And my queen also did 23 years, and again, 8-hour days, more like 25. And that whole thing is, you're either going to come out better or bitter, because you just see the worst in people every day. And she's actually out 13 years today. I've been out 6. So in that regard, I'm the rookie.
Congratulations to both of you on that regard, and thank you for your service and that as well.
It was, we look back now and we're just like, WTF.
Yeah.
Really? But, and I understand you've done your time in the military. Thank you for your service before.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting with our activities. Like, our kind find our kind within certain combative activities. So what I've found a lot is, aside from the hobbyist martial artists, because eventually we all start as a hobbyist martial artist. I mean, as much as we were not all of us were born into the life, so to speak. Like, if we're in America and Americans and just in the West in general, we started either in the backyard and eventually went into a proper studio, and we're raised up from there, and we're hobbyists at that point. There's nothing to do. Few of us will go into a profession of arms where this is actually relevant, or combat sports, or some sort of professional martial arts career. But at the end of all that, we retire from whatever our profession is, and we get to go back to the opportunity of we get to do martial arts instead of we have to do martial arts. And that distinction is, I find, very healthy and important, especially my point in my life at this right now. And it's interesting is, in the case of the profession of arms, is the perspective is different. For the reasons why an individual will participate in certain martial arts or just martial arts in general, because the application is so relevant, versus those who are, this is a commercial job for instruction as an educator, but not as a practical practitioner. Because there's, in the difference of a practical practitioner where you have a competitor, like a combat sports athlete, or a practical practitioner as an instructor, versus somebody who's actually going to use this in the field, either corrections, law, other forms of law enforcement, personal protection, military. So, and again, the perspective is different, and does bring a different story to the table for those who actually do and those who discuss. So
you just never know someone's backstory.
Yeah. And I mean, this is part of why I love this podcast, because I get to figure out, or not figure out, but I get to have the opportunity to sit here and chat with somebody and explain, or to have them explain the reasons why and the reasons why they continue. So what got you into corrections in the first place? Because that's, when we talk about a job, an 8-hour job, that is definitely pushing the stone uphill.
Yeah. It's a really good question. And before I forget, I got to tell you, whether it's police, military, corrections, there's somebody that I have huge respect for. He knows exactly who he is. He's 3 hours northeast of me. He was a bouncer for 20 years. I think that dude saw more blunt force trauma than I did as a bouncer, because he worked in a high profile area and took the beating day in and day out. And, in the nicest way, regardless, be it police, corrections, military, bouncing, or some type of physical job, when folks like that get together, the conversation is different. And I'm just listening to him over the years, and I'm just like, Jesus Christ, oh my God, I think I had it easier than him. And I've dealt with, and I've become close friends with somebody that did time in prison. And what a gentle soul. And one of the first things he had to do when he went in, and he wasn't a teenager when he went in and had to knock somebody the F out because they tried, setting him up. And he's like, yeah, I'm not the one. So he did a few years and he's out, and man, it's all these things are humbling.
Yeah, I have found, especially through the military and also coming out of the life, is people who have participated and engaged in incredible amounts of violence have, if they have all their screws still there or putting them in line, they have the opportunity to have incredible compassion and empathy, because they know the far extremes of what the human capability can be in its evil, visceral, carnal sense. And what makes us deeply human is our compassion, our opportunity to have empathy and hold space for people, for safety and for honesty, and just for a space for people to actually grow and move beyond, again, these primal urges, so to speak, that kept us alive as a species. But like, where we live in this societal structure of, well, we have this in us to be incredibly violent, but we got to get along with our neighbors, because our neighbors aren't, especially here in the West for the most part, are not actually trying to rape, pillage, and plunder. And so we have to use our certain skills. So yeah, it's interesting that, again, people who come from the life profession of arms have an idea of how to turn it off, but also have built compassion. So
yeah, that's no truer word spoken.
Yeah.
And it's very, very obvious when you come across somebody that's figured that out. I read something not that long ago. It said the more dangerous we become, the more gentler we must also become.
Yeah.
And that speaks to exactly what you're talking about. Back to your question, as far as corrections, I was already working for the state of Connecticut, working on the highway, doing highway lighting and literally traffic lighting. By trade, I was an electrician. And it was the same thing every day. Good job, good benefits, but bored out of my mind. And my supervisor, who I couldn't stand, said, "Hey, corrections is hiring. It's a paramilitary environment." And he says, "You're pretty squared away." And he says, "You got some discipline in you." He says, "Why don't you, if nothing else, go hear him out." He wasn't trying to get rid of me. But I went over and I went into this literally just a shithole, excuse my language, of a prison jail, 3 or 4 miles from where I was working in Hartford. And what the hell possessed me to go into the process, the application process, I don't know, because anybody with any rationale would have been like, "Oh, hell no. This jail was so old, they eventually knocked it down and turned it into a parking lot." But much larger agency, much more room for advancement, which really wasn't my priority. But being 1990, 91, so I'm 23, 24-ish. I said, what the hell? And I did it. Best move I ever did. Was absolutely paramilitary. Had tremendous opportunities, got heavily involved in defensive tactics, tactical teams, K9, training, eventually investigations. And even to this day in retirement, I'm working contract by contract as a subject matter expert in use of force and other correctional types of litigations, which keeps this going. And it's a higher level of challenge for me, because writing an investigative report for the agency as a captain, that's one thing. But getting into it, dealing with civil litigation with a bunch of attorneys, that changes everything. So that's a good challenge for me at this point in my life. And I can turn it off whenever I want. If I just don't want any more work, I'll just, But nothing specific sent me into corrections. My dad was a veteran, long-term police officer in a small town, Middletown, Connecticut, where I grew up. But there was no push for him of him pushing me into it. I have 2 older brothers. They're both engineers, respectively. Gave it a shot. I had his support, but he was on the job from like 1955 to 1982. And we're talking a town of 35,000, so for him to say, well, I did 27 years as a police officer, you can say like, wow. But are you a police officer in Juneau, Alaska, New York City, Boston, or Jerkwater, USA, where you've never unholstered your gun except for when you requalify every year? There's all details matter. And like I said, this bouncer that I just got nothing but mad respect for. I know 2. One's in Florida, one's up here in the Northeast, out of Mass. The stories these guys are telling me in private, I'm like, oh my God, what? I thought I was crazy, just because someone's been at it for decades doesn't necessarily mean, they've seen more or less than the next person. And then depending in the military, whether you were sent overseas for 1 tour or 2 or 3 or 4 or not, it's details matter, so nothing particular sent me in there. I actually tried for the state police twice, but they're notorious, at least they were notorious, for failing you 2 or 3 times on purpose, because they really want to see how bad you want the job. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not playing that game. Too stubborn. As a teenager, I think I processed the first time I was 19. Didn't want to play their game. So corrections it was, and they were very good to me. Had a lot of opportunities, and it's, in essence, I've been out 6 years. It's still serving me well. Got to use my skills, and I look back, and I was telling you before, my wife and I, we don't reminisce often, because I think we both have some PTSD, but the average corrections officer is not skilled. They're not boxers. They're not martial artists. They're not grapplers. Those are the real heroes. Those are the crazy bastards. I had 10 or 12 years in. Doesn't mean that I had all the answers, but at least I had some blunt force trauma training. These guys are just in there being brave, just with 0 fighting skills. That impressed the hell out of me. So,
yeah, So when I was on the guard, I was part of a cav unit that turned into an infantry battalion, or back into an infantry battalion. But the majority of my platoon here on the peninsula, we have two major prisons here on the peninsula. One is a Max Penn in Seward, Alaska, and then we have a state's, which will be like a county level transitionary facility called Wildwood up in Soldotna, Kenai area. And half of my platoon, to include my PL, were guards at this facility.
Okay.
And this isn't, like I said, it's not a Max Pen, it's not a high security, but they got into a few scraps. And the majority of people here are routine offenders going in because winters are hard. And so they get in, get clean, they get in, get fed, they get in and stay warm for their winter. But when it comes to the violence that they've dealt with there, a lot of it is drug related, mental health related. And not predatory versus like going to Seward. But my point with this is these guys, because one of my primary duties in the guard was a combatives trainer. And what was interesting is none of these guys had any real training through their agency. And none of these guys had the time and opportunity to participate in, say, jiu-jitsu, judo, boxing, because there wasn't stuff really. I mean, there's stuff available here on the peninsula, but not to the extent based upon their schedule allowed to their duty hours, let alone the drive and impetus to go do it. Because that's another thing people need to like acknowledge, is that people just don't want to do this stuff, even though like they professionally should, because they're in this profession that they are going to use it, but somehow they just believe that I'll just clock in. So these guys didn't have a lot of training initially, don't have any reciprocal training, and then they don't pursue any training, and it's a scary thing. And then you got some of these guys who are like superstars who are all these things, but then again, they get shanked and they get ambushed. So it's the whole dynamic of, you may be the best and capable, but chaos in the universe has a say in everything. So it's an interesting dichotomy, and it's an interesting fact that, again, training matters, but like training schedule availability and the desire to train is I find far more important than training available. Because if you don't want to go do it, and you don't have that drive, and you don't have the reason why, then even if the training is there, you're not even going to be clocked in. Because I still I have experienced that as well, my own, and also being as a trainer of like, I can tell when the guys just don't want to be there. They just want to punch in and punch out, and it's frustrating. It's sad, but it is what it is.
Yep. You know, and the few, by comparison to all of them, the few that do seek out training, whether it's jiu-jitsu or any of the combatives, God bless them. But that's kind of still sometimes viewed by their spouse or the better half as part of the job. Oh, you worked 40 hours this week plus 20 hours of overtime, and now you're going to go roll, or you're going to the range. Yeah, because I want to keep coming home to you in one piece. And sometimes that's a deal breaker as it is. But you're absolutely right. Some of them just clock in and punch in. They're like, that's a job. You know, it is what it is. Some of them are just rock solid, diehard, very brave people. Others are dedicated to it, and they stay in shape, both cardio and strength training and some physical skills. But the overwhelming majority are just like, it's a job.
Yeah. And I find that's also been the case in my experience in the military, is for a lot of people, they signed up for that GI Bill. So not saying we don't have true warriors, because we do. Not saying that we don't have true believers in, because we do. But it is interesting, even within a profession of arms, that there's a bell curve of people who are actually going to be at the peak and use it, and then everybody else that's just kind of somewhere in between. It is something I'm trying to wrap my head around for years when it comes to that regard, as to training, what I'm doing with my training, and whom I am training with. And again, where I'm in this phase of I get to do this stuff rather than I have to. Because like rolling with our officers with a local agency here in town, like there's 3 or 4 of them that are pretty consistent in the gym. And I can see where, it's the extra hours that you spend in, it's the extra time away, it's the extra duty, and just like, well, they have to do this, but it will pay dividends for them in the end. And I'm grateful for them to take up the opportunity. And I'm also grateful that their agency and our city has allotted funding and an opportunity for them to go do that, because that's another big part of the conversation when it comes to training schedules, is that issue about state or agency funding by the municipality to give them the time and day to actually go do that. Because at least in the military, we had PT, and it was required for us to go do some sort of physical activity. It's gotten better over the years, as I understand, where they block off morning PT and then combatives, and obviously like our profession of arms training. But having those dedicated times to create this foundation of fighting, I can see that as a healthy outlet and a healthy community and healthy agency. And for those agencies that do that, all the better for them.
Yeah. And unfortunately, when I was an officer from 92 until 2000, full-time officer, and then a canine handler, still an officer, but assigned to a statewide tactical unit. Our in-service training, back then, almost all of us were on a 5-on-3 off rotation. And when your Monday through Friday came up once a year, it was a 56-week rotation. 56-day rotation. But at some point during the year, when you were up for in-service, you'd take Monday through Friday, because there would be no overtime for you. You'd go to in-service for 40 hours. All days, off-site, 5 days. By the time I retired, it was down to, at best, 1 day a year. The rest went online, which is useless. Yes, you can force the program to make you can't keep hitting enter, enter, enter. So you have to see the whole 1 hour course. You ain't bullshitting anybody. You ain't paying attention. You're just waiting for the prompt so you can hit enter. So we went from 5 days of annual in-service every year down to 1. And the academy didn't really suffer. It's still about 10 weeks. By comparison, it's never enough. They get 40 hours of defensive tactics. But training, because of the dollars it costs, has been completely bastardized. What good is 8 hours of defensive tactics annually? Never mind, you're only going to get 2 hours at a time whenever they can spare you at this point. So yeah, that's a hot mess, and it's just not getting any better across the board. PDs, training budgets, we've seen a huge decline since COVID. Not to mention the cadet pool is down to nothing for law enforcement and corrections, any of the civil services. It's just not a priority anymore.
Yeah, I mean, especially after defund the police, because like we had 2 open hires, 2 positions open up here in our local agency, and talking with them, because one of my students or training partners applied for it, and he was disqualified for whatever professional reasons. But the point what I'm getting at is, like, they had 4 applicants for 2 positions, and talking to the lieutenant, who's a friend of mine, is that like 5-6 years ago, they would have 50 applications nationwide coming into our little town with an agency of 20 officers. Yep. And just this round of hiring, they had like 4 or 5 maybe. And there's one, like, people don't want to do it, obviously, because it's a hard job and the optics are difficult. And 2, like the disqualification of going into law enforcement. Like in my own case, I can't go into law enforcement because my shenanigans as a teenager, and I can't pass the psych test. So there's that, which is odd because I had a TS when I was in the Army, but that's a whole different story. But it is odd for like the self-disqualification versus like, I don't want to go in law enforcement because, again, the optics and the social viewpoint of it. And it's scary is what it is.
It is. And COVID made it worse only because of the scarcity of it. And I really don't know what it's going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years. There seems to be a little recovery happening where the cadet pool and those that are applying, that number is slowly creeping up, but it is still way down at the bottom of the well. So yeah, I don't know. I attend and teach at a Use of Force conference every year here in Connecticut. It's called the Use of Force Summit. We are over 900 deep. It's the biggest thing like it. There's nothing really else like it going on. Police, predominantly 90% of these folks are police, but there's also sheriffs and corrections. Those numbers are steadily growing. from all over the country, to include Alaska and Hawaii, and most of the other states. And the number of percentages that they are running short-staffed is just mind-boggling. There are some prison systems, I won't name them because I don't want to make anybody nervous. They're running 60% short. So your roster, every 2 out of 3 slots, empty. How are they even functioning blows my mind.
Not to mention, like, the intake level is 3 times to 4 times that. So yeah, it's not like they're not getting any busy or any less busy. So
they're changing the laws in some places. Connecticut has redlined a few, not redlined, but they've decriminalized certain acts. Getting caught with a small dose of marijuana now is a civil infraction. You pay a monetary fine. It used to get jailed before. Of course, it's being legalized in areas, but they're absolutely doing everything they can to not fill up the prisons. Unfortunately, that's leaving that many more crimes unchecked. And you can see just the behavior of the public. They're like, screw it, I ain't gonna do anything to me, you know? So yeah.
And Connecticut isn't a constitutional carry state either. Am I correct?
It is now. It used to be open carry.
Okay.
It is now concealed carry.
Okay, because that leads to another interesting dynamic when it comes to society and culture. Is, again, the old world adage: an armed society is a polite society. Caveat to that is, in a society that's rampant with unchecked mental health issues, and also criminals, they just check the box in their own category, so they just don't care. They just do whatever. The thought process is like the daily carry good Samaritan citizen with a firearm can help dissuade certain things, because, like, up here in Alaska, people tend not to pop off for the potentiality of somebody packing. However, criminals still do criminal things, and people who are mentally unstable will do things as well. So it's an odd dynamic, and then I wonder, and I don't have the statistics, and I need to find, either I need to do the research or just have a conversation with a person where the statistics are in question about concealed or constitutional carry compared to criminality, and the how am I going to phrase this? Is there a balance between constitutional carry and criminality, and mitigating that? Because people, I mean, again, an armed society is a polite society, but is it really? So,
and no matter what we do, the criminals are not going to abide by the laws.
Yeah.
So, what is the proper response overall as a society? You know, breaking into a home in Connecticut is one thing. Try that in Texas or Alaska. It's different. So I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever have those answers.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in the case of the commentary about society is the use of force and the use of violence helps comply people to maintain social norms and social contracts. Caveat to that is, again, criminals do criminal things, but violent criminals, understand the language of violence. So they're, as a predator, as a human predator, they go after the easy target. And again, the idea of potentially packing, that's not an easy target. However, we've seen consistently in these constitutional carry states, I hate to turn this into a 2A conversation, but it's relevant to our field as practitioners, is like you have people who carry, but they're untrained, people who carry that clearly don't train, and they have this reliance on the tool and the lack of skill sets to protect them and have this perception of safety. And this is in the case of, back to the segue of martial arts, especially FMA, we run into this scary dynamic of, we do these wonderful knife drills, we do stick drills, we do all these things in a safe training environment without any real risk of injury and that mindset shift into a predatory violent state. And so there's this illusion of skill transference, the Dunning-Kruger effect, so to speak. And it also runs into a scary dynamic of FMAers, or just martial artists, but in case of FMAers are caught off guard and they try to apply their skills and they come up short catastrophically.
Yeah, there's a course that you might be interested in. Unfortunately, it's not cheap. It's a company called Force Science.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of PhDs out of Minnesota. Well, the founder, Bill Lewinsky, is I call him sensei because he studied in the 50s and 60s and 70s.
Yep.
Real good guy, dedicated, pushing 80 years old, still pushing the envelope in his research. And they study high stress inoculation affects on the body, basically officer-involved shootings. It's a 1-week course. I almost lost my ever-loving mind because you're in lectures all day. You have a case assigned to you in groups of 4 that you have to crack. And you have homework every night because there's a pass or fail test on Thursday, and you have to do a short presentation on Friday. Yep. So people think they're going to go and goof off for this week. My brain was hurting when I went in roughly 2014. Yep. But one of the tests that they did, they had a motor vehicle stop simulation in a warehouse with vehicles, and the officers were told nothing. Motor vehicle stop, have at it. Well, the instruction of the suspect vehicle, the driver had a blank 38 sitting just like this. As soon as they see the officer pass the B pillar, bang. And they were all videotaped. And I still have a picture. I'll send it to you before as soon as we get done. There was a tactical officer, all of 6'2", walked up to the B pillar, leans over, gets shot. Literally both feet leave the ground, maybe an inch. Yeah. And his draw went from just drawing and clearing a holster to this. Yeah. Chest high. Freaked out. He stayed in it, but then when he ran to the rear of the car for cover, they asked him to retrace his steps afterward, and the computer tracked him, and he thought he cut the corner pretty tight. He didn't. Yeah. So here's a highly trained tactical officer that just, in terms of his reaction, was not what we expected, because it was literally walk up and get shot dead. Yeah. Only 2 or 3 officers, and then another scenario wasn't getting shot instantly. It was showing the gun, but don't shoot yet from the bad guy. 2 or 3 out of all of the testing that they did, maybe 100 people, only 2 or 3 lunged for the gun instantaneously rather than drawing their own firearm. And they were all defensive tactics instructors. Yeah. Yeah. Because the hands were trained, and it wasn't that they were trained to grab, it was to react physically. Yeah. They can read and respond. Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was a very interesting set of dynamics. But, yeah, all these guys do is study after study, and try and help us better understand what happens when the SHIT hits the FAN. It's interesting. Well, it's again, read and respond, and the familiarity of I've been here, I kind of know what to do. And again, it's that stress inoculation. And the problem with stress inoculation, and this is my conversations with people like my senior brother, Jeff Johnsgard, who is one of these big brain use of force people, is this problem of transference of skill and this idea of trying to do stress inoculation attached to heart rate. And it's like, well, according to him and according to some of the other readings I've been finding, it's like that's not the case. Heart rate doesn't exactly help with the decision-making process for skill acquisition, retention, mimicking a stressful environment. I'm going to butcher it, but I'll reference Jeff Johnsgard for that case. But it's the overall, like, we tend to use almost elevated heart rates to simulate an adrenal state. And that data apparently is incorrect. So I don't know. It's interesting as to what people are coming to, because we have a scientific approach. It's not anecdotal. And again, this is going back to martial arts, where the majority of martial arts has been a patrilineal, anecdotal, oral tradition, relying on the good works of the forebear, even though like 20 to 50 to 100 years have separated. So how much of that's actually bullshit and made up versus the reality of what actually is? And the benefit of like today in our world in 2025 with such access to data and scientific methods to track and to analyze and to come up with better training modalities,
I mean, it's a great time to be alive to understand violence, to train it and prepare for it, and also realize that like this shit, that fighting is simple. It's not easy, and it's also incredibly scary if you're behind the curve on the willingness to use it and the mindset of it. Because one of the things that I have found in my own instruction, especially within agencies or agency attached, is this transition from the criminal mindset versus the law enforcement mindset. Is trying to, I hate to say sell this idea, but present this idea of criminal creativity. Because a big discussion that comes up in the FMA community, especially the knife community, is this criminal knife systems, the prison knife systems, and how do we train the mindset? And so, like, trying to present this stuff to people in law enforcement as to let's do criminally creative things and think like a criminal. It's like, well, it's hard to turn that part of their brain off if they come from law enforcement background. And then on top of all that, you have the people in between kind of doing what if as like they're trying to live vicariously through this, and versus like people who actually seen and done this and done some hood rat shit. So, and that's what you're finding is though, when you can see certain videos like the Las Cruces video with the officer who killed on duty due to also with the contact and the guy pulled the knife and everything else. I don't know if you're familiar with this video. The criminal's already engaged in violence. He was already made the choice, and he was also practiced at doing this. But going through this mental game as a practitioner, as an instructor, and also for a law enforcement officer, trying to understand how this works, like that's a whole other side of the coin that people just don't want to do, and they resist because of all these layers of morality and justification.
Yeah, the criminal mindset is I don't know if it's instinctive or you're born with it, but if you are raised in a violent neighborhood or country for 20, 30 years, and then you move here or you move to a nicer place in this country, the things they are willing to do without giving it a second thought. You just hit the key word, morality. We have ethics and morals if we've been raised halfway decent. People don't realize criminals just don't care. There's no, it's survival. It's either me or you, and that's it. They're not thinking, they're doing this. And we're sitting there like, wow, what's the law say? What am I doing here? Oh man, the criminals, what they're willing to do for such a little gain sometimes is horrible. Some of the cases I'm working now, hypothetically, the reason some of these guys are in, it wasn't just a matter of taking a life. It was be it dismemberment or doing things to what's left. It's like, really? And they're in 20, 30 years and they're getting a little older. They're getting a little softer. Still can't trust them because that potential is still in there.
Oh yeah, the shark is still a shark.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's been rehabilitated. He's been behaving for 25 years. Yeah, dude, he murdered somebody in cold blood, plus the girlfriend, plus the kid, and the dog. That was not just, what are we going to do today? And I'm not judging. I'm just saying that potential is always there. And if you've ever read up, I hope you kind of haven't, Gacy, Dahmer, and some of these true high-level serial killers, they were absolutely gentlemen, charming, intelligent, articulate, very manipulative, obviously.
Yeah, malignant narcissists and sociopaths.
Absolutely. Yes. I got to know the sheriff that got Dahmer locked up after he escaped. Yeah. Down in Florida. And he told Dahmer to his face, he goes, yeah, you ain't getting out. You may have gotten out last time. You ain't getting out this time. Yeah. And Dahmer's got his arm on the wall. Give me 1 second.
Yeah. Well, folks, I mean, here's the fun part about this podcast is we get to dive into the weeds about stuff. And yeah, we don't always have to talk specifically about FMA history or culture. Like, honestly, I go through moods for my audience if I want to talk about FMA history and culture, and other times I want to talk about violence because it's incredibly relevant to who and what we do, or who we are and what we do. So yeah, anyways.
I know there's some reflection here.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Is Jeffrey Dahmer, or This is Sergeant Ken Caceres reading him his arrest paperwork.
Wow, that's crazy.
Uncuffed, leaning against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
This was 78, 77? Yeah. We actually convinced the sheriff to do a presentation on this situation. And by now, my God, the sheriff he's testified as an expert in all 50 states, an amazing resume, on the job for decades. But they finally sweet talked him into doing a presentation at this annual use of force conference on Dahmer. And I can't imagine the stories that he has. I've sat with him a few times, but it doesn't get much worse than that. And yet this guy was the nicest going, articulate, intelligent, manipulative predator. I don't even remember how many victims he had. He had a lot. But the sociopathic behavior is scary because the human mind is an amazing tool, but
sometimes it comes in broken, or sometimes we break it.
Yeah. But when you take a good person and put them in a situation with a very bad person, one's going to be morally conscientious. The other one's not. No. And you can't train somebody to be morally absent. You either have morals and ethics or you don't. And it's not that easy, but I've seen it time and time again. And that's when as the years went by, I'm walking out of the prison amongst all these folks that have zero fighting skills. And I'm like, you guys are men and women. You're as brave as they come. Oh my God. Either that or you're just crazy.
Yeah.
My first several years were very difficult because we were dealing with a lot of gang problems. And we finally cracked down on it in around 94 statewide. But a lot of battles. You almost did some push-ups every day before roll call at 3:30 in the afternoon, because as soon as you go in, you're probably going to be rolling around.
Yep.
But these average everyday people, it's like, damn. And I'm not thinking I'm any better or different. I've been abused for 10 or 12 years, getting banged up, beat up. My time tapping out with the professor and whatnot. But oh my God, regular everyday people. Let's do it.
It's crazy because my experience with criminal violence comes from gangs. It comes from scrapping, being involved in hood rat shit. It wasn't necessarily from the predatory aspect of I'm a predator, I'm going after. It's just happened to be with wrong people doing dumb things as a teenager, unsupervised, and doing what needs to be done in that moment. Now there is the other side of that with the homies that I rolled with, like things they would do, like the razor game. Or it's kind of like the knockout game now, but you walk in a crowd and see if you can cut a person and get away with it, or cut a person, move and pass the knife along. I mean, I've talked about this game all the time in this podcast, but that has been my experience when it comes to criminal violence. Just the same as the random shankings, not necessarily we're going to shank to kill you in the case of the prison knife systems or the human predator. It's more or less we're just going to fuck with you and we're just going to do it, see if we can do it. And I tend to I have to be conscious as not to skew my own viewpoint of violence based upon that when I talk about it, because there's a whole other subsection that I'm not hitting. That's my little piece of the pie. And there's so much more. Because talking about combat and military, that's a whole different thing. But in the civil portion of dealing with violence as a civilian, there's so much more in the consideration of, especially in training with and training of law enforcement. And this is where I wonder, in the case of it, in the discussion about worshiping violence, worshiping the knife cults, is this tricky area of an individual who participates in edged weapons combatives. What is that line that they cross to become a worshiper of death, the knife cultist, and especially dealing with these prison knife systems? Because I find a certain demographic of people who participate in it, and I wonder why, and haven't got a straight answer from that demographic. So what are some of your viewpoints on these knife systems?
When you look at the knife versus the firearm folks seem to be very cognizant of the laws. Most of them, not all, realize you take that thing out and start squeezing rounds off, you better be justified.
And it's a lethal force engagement.
Hopefully, you're aware of what's behind your target in case you miss, because every round that misses goes to court. The knife folks as a whole, that's a very different animal, because it's not that they don't realize it's deadly force. Deadly force is I'm completely confident you already know it's force that can result in death or serious physical injury, not necessarily death. So a knife is just as lethal as a firearm. The knife folks don't seem to understand the lethality and the consequences if that knife ever meets flesh. Better be another knife involved, or a weapon, or something up there that can justify cutting. And does it mean that firearms folks are more responsible? From what I've seen, this one cross section, yes, but they seem to be more cognizant of the law and the legalities involved. The knife folks, I think they've got a training kind of pastime approach to what could land them in jail for a very long time. And the average person, it takes nothing to go buy a knife. You can buy a knife at a truck stop. I mean, Marie and I just hit Florida and came back for a couple of months, and almost all these big truck stops, they got a whole showcase full of holders.
I'd just get a razor blade or a craft knife, because that's been my experience.
Yeah, Home Depot, plenty of them. But the knife folks seem to be, they're dedicated, they're determined, but they don't seem to be as cognizant or conscientious of what they're getting into. If they're just studying it and training in it, and that's their pastime, that's good. But a lot of them carry, and as soon as that thing comes out, if that thing finds flesh, man, they're in a world of surprise, and it's not going to be pretty. You know, on occasion, as I'm sure you see some of these forums, there's some really good, challenging questions out there. But I've spent more than my fair share of time with attorneys, and I am not an attorney. I don't want to be an attorney. But I spend a lot of time with them, whether it's this annual summit or my contract work. And in prepping to work with a particular litigation unit specific to corrections, they said, all right, you're going to spend a day with us in the office, and we're going to talk. So it was an interesting day. The primary takeaway was this: the courtroom is not about the truth. It is about perception of 6 or 12 people that are total strangers that have no effing clue what deadly force is, who you are, why you did what you did, nor do they care. They're going to take the so-called facts and decide your fate.
Perception is reality. Association is truth.
And it's a game. Who can affect the jury more? And when you think about it, that's some really scary shit. Because the average juror has no clue what you do or what I do or why we do what we do, or that veteran police officer or veteran trooper. I'll give you a great case instance of what just happened this week, literally within the last 7 days. There's a lady, she was 55. She worked for the prisons. Her job was to handle inmate files. She's called a records specialist. That's all she does. She doesn't go into the prison. She's out front. Been doing this over 25 years. She's getting divorced. They decide to sell the house. They have a son. Let's just say he's 30. He was in his 30s. She's already moved out of the house, living with her son over there. The father is moving out of the actual house. So the son goes over to help him. The son has a friend of the same age helping. For whatever reason, mom shows up. Mom and dad start verbally arguing. Dad shoots and kills mom. Son gets involved, tries to intervene. Dad shoots and kills his own son. The son's friend is a licensed to carry firearm owner. Took it out and drops and kills dad. The police show up and they're like, what the fuck? What? Nobody move. It took them forever to figure this one out. And imagine the trauma, the drama, the PTSD that this survivor is going to have for the rest of his life. He lost his friend, his mother, and he had to take a life. And I'm not going to ask you because it's none of my business. I've never taken a life. But for those that did, even if it was 100% justified, you still have to live with the fact that you took a life. That's not good. And they did a lot of studies out of Vietnam where these soldiers were getting shot at, and they interviewed them ad nauseum. Some of them couldn't bring themselves to accurately return fire because they didn't want to kill somebody, even though they're being shot at. And yet there were others that said, well, can we ask you some questions? They were a sniper. What did you feel when you knowingly shot and killed somebody?
Recoil of the rifle.
So you got two totally different animals there. But they said you would be amazed. I had the privilege of meeting Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman.
Nice.
Who's a firecracker.
Mm-hmm.
And he said we can work with almost anyone with PTSD to a certain level of success. But understand that those men that couldn't even return fire knowing they were being shot at, there's only so much you can do there. And they're
it's
that trauma with them their whole life.
A lot of it is the locus of control, just from my own experience, education, and therapy. Is again, you have I'm going to say it, special operations, combat arms, like go-getters, pipe hitters. That's what they're there for. They're America's acceptable sociopaths. They're put on a pedestal of like, we want you to do this because we need you to be wolves, not sheepdogs, wolves. You need to go on the hunt. You need to go kill the enemy. That's your job. Break in case of war. Now, bear in mind, a lot of these individuals, we got some very public social media people that are in question about their valor and whatnot. But the fact is, you can tell they like this stuff. They went in specifically to go do this. That's not normal. It's normal to say, hey, I want to defend my own and do what I need to do. Right. Sure. But like actively telling that they want to go do this stuff, that is that due to morality, if it was the other side of it, they're going to prison. But because they are wrapped up in the flag and patriotism, it's acceptable. Right. So where everybody in between, though, the majority, because these are two extreme points on the shoehorn here, everybody caught in the middle is like, they're doing this because it's a job. They're doing this because they're called to serve. They're doing this because they have this desire to do something, but they aren't part of that 1% of either side. So again, the locus of control of they're reacting to contact, they're reacting to the situation. They may have to do this. The reasons why are specific to, a code of honor, loyalty, and oath, whatever the training, but they're what I call not necessarily true believers in that regard. And we got true believers that on the scale of morality and perspective that are acceptable, and then we got the unacceptable. And it's interesting in dealing with, again, with PTSD and combat related and violence related PTSD is the majority of people that had it happen to them, in my experience and even in my own, is just like you carry that because it happened to you, because the locus of control was not yours, versus you're going to go hit a target. You're already there. You already know and you prepped for it, and you made the decision to engage at that level of violence and lethality versus having it happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I find. Spectrum. Yeah. And what I find, like specifically like in the personal protection space and self-defense, especially with women's self-defense, for one, I've said this often, I really hate empowerment seminars. I really hate the term empowerment because it's a false sense of security. I will die on that hill. But again, it's the issue of like, you do 4 hours, do nothing throughout the time. You feel good, did a few punches and kicks, looks cool for promo, but you're not actually doing any real work. So thus the model of empowerment. You see that also in men's self-defense seminars or personal protection. You see that model everywhere, and I'm disgusted by it. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's better than nothing, but the purpose behind it is not serving for the long term. And so my point with that is in the self-defense community is it's reactionary after the fact. The majority of clients that I've had and people I've worked with is they've had a violent situation occur to them, and they have to work the way through and from that point of after the fact. And that ends up being harder in general because you have to work through their trauma. You have to work through their triggering process and resetting their mindset. And just in the same, like, again, one aspect, say combat sports, is you get knocked down, you have a catastrophic loss, and you can work your way through it, get past that mental game. The same can be said in the extreme as violence directed toward a person as a victim, especially in like a rape violence situation for a woman or even a man, or you're dealing with the lack of locus of control in combat, and you have to work your way back forward and find that space to be capable and confident, versus somebody who was prepared ahead of time and took the steps to be able to have the opportunity to engage when they want to engage, and how and when, take the initiative, control the battle space, etc.
We need degrees in psychology to be doing what we're doing.
And this is why I really like with, and just a plug with Eric Poirier and Mark Mediaros, like what they're doing with the trauma informed training, because there's so much more to what we do other than the punching, the kicking, the situational awareness. Is there's the after effect and the pregame, the soft skills of what are we dealing with as the individual, the practitioner, and also as instructors of working through our trauma, working through our clients' trauma. And I'm glad I'm glad that society is accepting of this. We have means and methods to address this. The caveat to that is it came at the cost of 20 years of sustained combat. So, I mean, again, development at the speed of war, development at the speed of violence. But in the end of all this, again, a little bit of suffering built some resiliency. But hell, I mean, that was a rough 20 years, and it's getting rougher. But in the case of law enforcement, and this is what I find on the other side of these conversations, is law enforcement, it hasn't changed necessarily as in regard of like, it's always been this. And and certain agencies have a lot of support and means to do it. But culturally, there seems to be steps going backwards and below, and it's deeply frustrating.
It is. And I mean, it's nice to see the advances that we've made to, if nothing else, to become aware of what we're dealing with. Because they would say, oh, when the men came back from World War II, the women were already in the factories having finished making the weapons and the tanks and Rosie the Riveter and the Revolution and everything. But we didn't address a lot of the mental health issues because we didn't know any better as a society. When those men came back, they went right back to work. They just went back to work. We got to go to work. Yeah. Now we got to, pay the mortgage. Oh boy. Versus debriefings, both tactical and mental health. And sometimes in some cases there's mandatory debriefings and therapy. A friend of mine who was a former trooper was on an internet unit, crime unit, and their job was to hunt the predators. They had to sit with a therapist, I think once a month, to make sure they weren't losing their minds and making sure that most of what was up here and in here was relatively intact. So we're becoming a lot better at it, but man, there's just so many different levels of it. And, you're training somebody personally that has trauma versus one that hasn't. Boy, you got two different animals there.
On top of all, you have your own trauma from the experience. Because again, this is the issue about lived in experience versus academic. Academic, again, this is martial arts versus people who actually lived the life and done the things. Martial artists can be these people, but too often we see in the commercial martial arts space that it's purely academic without any real world experience in it. Maybe got in a fight here and there, but like never really sat in the space of violence. And so they don't have the issue of dealing with their own trauma whilst teaching somebody through their trauma. They can just do it academically, but there is a bit of a disconnect as to like what is the real reality of actually what we're getting into versus somebody who lived a life, done the things, and not trying to teach that to somebody who's had that happen to them or in preparation to live the life and doing the things, and making sure that they're not hijacked and going through the filter of their own trauma and thereby creating a problem of giving a false presentation, not giving the fullness of what they should be doing, or better yet, it's just like they're triggered by their own shit, and in so doing, there's this cycle, this codependency of trauma. And again, the term trauma kindling, or I'm throwing this word a lot, is you keep throwing fire, and you got your fire and their fire, and just keeps getting worse. And so at some point, you need to snuff that thing out so you can build it back up again.
Even if there's a way to loop this back in, I know, I don't know a lot of it, but I know Professor saw a lot of carnage in the Philippines.
Oh, yeah.
Born in 36, did not see an actual classroom till at least 9 or 10 years old because they were living in the mountains.
And he left during Marcos?
Yeah. So this guy didn't see a classroom until he was 9 or 10.
Yeah.
And then in high school, very formidable. The principal and the teachers really couldn't control him, so they said, "Hey, we want you to be security." And he wore that badge proudly, but he would participate in these matches called squares after school, where there were agreed upon fights.
Yeah.
And he was just a hellion. And I'm getting this directly from the late Grandmaster Cristino Vasquez, his cousin, when I was visiting him in the Philippines in 06. And he said, Professor didn't listen to anybody.
Yeah.
Just did what he did, which is not uncommon. He's born in 36 and, stayed there until roughly 1975 when he was 40. Allegedly, Marcos was officially looking for him.
Yeah.
Shocker. But once he came over and I started training with him, initially under Sifu Lee, and then on my own, he basically read several of us, but I'll just speak for myself. He said, "You will never teach offensive knife.
Yeah. Okay.
It's evil. It's bad."
Okay.
And he said, "You can teach them how to defend off the knife, but you will not teach offensive knife." And he said, in this country, they do not know how to use the knife.
No.
He says she's thrusting or cutting. He said, insert and then J. And classic Professor. He said, you do that to the belly and it just goes disembowel, right? We ain't got to get into the details.
Yep.
And he said, once they go, they cannot fight. But he said they should see, they should feel, if you know what you're doing, they should feel it before they see it.
That is correct.
Now, imagine hearing that at 14 years old. What the hell am I getting into here?
Yeah.
But he ain't kidding. He ain't playing. Now, imagine this. The karate school at the time was 500 feet from Burger King. Well, Professor loved him some Burger King. So Sifu,
fair.
Sifu says, take the Burger King. Don't let anything happen to him. What the fuck? Okay. We come back. We each have our cups, our drinks. And he keeps offering me his. Literally 14 or 15 years old. I have no freaking clue. I have my own. Why are you offering me yours? Repeatedly. This is 1982 or 3. Okay. Marcos is still in power until the People's Power Revolution of 1986.
I have a story about that for later, but I can share. I've shared it on here, but I can share it to you later.
So we get back, and I can't wait to ask Sifu why he did that. Why he keep offering me his drink? I got my own. So eventually, Professor Presas leaves town. He goes off to his next seminar because he would come to visit Sifu Lee several times a year and stay for a few days. And I still remember the look on his face. He looked at me. He looks away like he don't want to answer, and he looks back. He said he wanted to make sure his drink was safe.
Yeah.
Country's still at war.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at him like, that's kind of fucked up.
Yeah.
But he's still in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And he's been here 6-7 years at that point. And when he got on the mat and somebody showed up with a camera, the pupils constricted. At the Victoria video shoot, September 1998. Oh my God. I was really the only one that was asked to be there that had trained with him in the 80s. Everyone else was there training with him maybe 5 or 6 years. So this is 1998. And they're all looking at me like, why does he look so mad? I said, he's not mad. He's about to flex in front of that camera. And it's going to suck to be us. Because he had that look right. I mean, if you want to talk about, and I'm sure with your military background, you've heard of the 1,000-yard stare and that look when you just know it's coming. You don't need the narrative. Yeah. And I'm just like, oh, here we go. 3 days, all day. Next. you know, and I sincerely in my heart, I can't say he knew he was sick because that was 3 years before his diagnosis. And a grade 4 is usually rapid growing. This thing isn't going to sit around. So I don't think he was physically sick, but I wonder if he knew at 62 years old, if that was the last time that he was really going to be able to perform at that level.
Again, I mean, trauma, that level of trauma, your body manifests it because the brain and the body knows no difference.
Yeah.
And on top of all that, the body holds the score. Incredibly important book for people to read about trauma informed and what your body does in the response to PTS. And yeah, like that level of trauma that he dealt with, both recipient and participant, it's going to come out somehow.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's incredible.
And
again, like somebody lives in their own body and so in tune of it, they kind of know what's going on with them. Even if they don't know scientifically, they know something's wrong.
He let it rip for 3 days.
Yep.
And now I'm flying home to Connecticut with a very near and dear friend of mine, Larry Roca. Larry was probably one of the biggest, burliest guys in the video with the curly hair. I went to do the air vent on the plane because it was hot. Glass breaking by the time I got to here. I couldn't. I was so sore at 31 years old. I'm looking at it like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to sweat.
Yeah.
That's how bad it was. And that lasted a good couple of days. But you know what? I still watch them once in a while to just to reminisce. And even though it's a little painful, it was an honor to do it. But I had never seen him do that for that long.
Yeah.
I had seen spurts. But I swear he knew this was the last time that he was really going to be able to let it rip.
Yeah.
And boy, did he let it rip. But no, you know, I guess when you do a video, you're supposed to have like a storyboard and kind of an outline. Yeah, there was none of that shit.
No, you just go like, come here, boy. Here we go.
Film crew, they're ready. They're running 2 different cameras.
Yeah.
And they changed tapes. It was still tapes back then, 1998. Every 30 minutes, they had a switch. But he just was completely spontaneous. And at the end of the weekend, we're crawling out of there. And who's walking in? Some guy named Ray Dionaldo.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Professor left the camera crew in place and let Ray pick up where he left off.
I have this video. I love this video.
And that was my first meeting with Ray. We literally met like this. Well, I was crawling. He was walking. So I was probably looking up. But got to cross paths with him a couple of more times over the years. And now he's one of the instructor legacy camp instructors. And, but that's talk about how do you say when you support somebody, giving someone a stepping stone. Those cameras were left. He rented an Aikido dojo for the weekend in Victoria. And he left everything in place when he knew he was done. Actually, he did go back Monday. But one of those evenings, Saturday or Sunday, he set it up for Ray.
That's awesome.
And look how well traveled and well liked Ray is. At this point. We're the same age. He and I are months apart. And humble as they come. You know, he'll tell you he was not so humble years ago, but
as one isn't. Really, young men.
Yeah, well, we all go through it. But yeah, I never forgot that chance meeting. But I was literally peeling the professor's shirt off him at the end of each workout, just soaked. The dojo, he wouldn't even let us open the windows. He wanted it hot in there because of the level of activity. You know, we're dying in the heat, but he just kept drinking water and he says, again, one more, 37 times. But I wish I was smart enough to ask for a copy of the unedited video. But I wasn't thinking that way at the time.
I mean, you're too busy getting beat up. So, I mean, it's got to be out there somewhere, hopefully, in the universe.
Well, no, because what he did is I don't even think the film studio is intact anymore. Once they edited, I think the orders were given to nix the leftovers. The leftovers never left the studio.
Oh, that sucks.
Everything cut. It was a professional film crew.
Yeah.
But about 15 videos came out of it. But classic Professor, one was 30 minutes, one was 50. There was no symmetry, you know. But what I find interesting is you watch him from the 80s teaching the classics and the traditionals. And then you watch those Victoria tapes and you see a very different, much more efficient, older artist, but the thunder was still there.
Oh yeah.
Just totally not repackaged, but efficient, streamlined, and hard to put it in words, but taking everything that he was doing and then really made it a part of the flow, and then entered into the left side of the tappy tappy and the corridas. It's almost, and this just recently came up on a discussion on Facebook. We almost relearned and how it took everything in the 80s and put it into the flow that he gave us in the 90s.
Yeah.
You know, and he was so fluid with this stuff. The tricky part was he'd show you something and he'd show it to you a few times, but he wouldn't really break it down and narrate it for you.
Yeah.
You know, you get the reps with him, and you hope to see him again. And hopefully he did it again. Of course, he would do it and then do a variation of it. So he was not a picture perfect instructor in terms of how he taught.
How
but
how many instructors are classically educated educators who understand how to create a curriculum with and also detail it and all these things? The answer is not many. So, and especially our older instructors, men who came out of the Philippines, men and women who came out of the Philippines, especially in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, like a lot of them have very little education, formal education by Western standard. Like, what do we expect? Like, and this leads into this issue of the different evolutions of curriculum, and thereby the students argue about it afterwards, like in case of the Modern Arnis community. It's like people need to look at that filter and actually have that like critical viewpoint of like, well, not classically educated, not classically trained educator, therefore curriculum is kind of made through the perspective and filter of those who are watching, listening, trying to understand and explain through a language barrier and age barrier. And there's different evolutions based upon what the man liked to do at the time. And so and you have different generations of people who trained. And this is in my observation of the Modern Arnis community. I'm part of it, but not to the extent of some others. But it's like, this is where you see a lot of the tribal conflict in different camps of whose curriculum at what point is more valid than the other. And it's interesting to observe.
It is. We had, it's been very interesting in Modern Arnis since COVID. In 2020, I wanted to bring in 2 big names. Normally I only bring in 1, and I do it every 6 months. And I said, you know what if I bring in 2? My queen and I are very, very tremendous mutual respect. We both have an eye twitch and we know how to deal with it. But I said, hey, I'm going to bring in A and B. She knew them both. She goes, you think we'll be okay? Because there's expenses involved. And I said, I do. Well, it got canceled because of COVID. I rebooked for 2021 instantly a year later. So we're talking October. But the difference now is 2021 is the 20th anniversary of us losing him. So now I'm thinking, I keep hearing, and when you're looking at me, you got a warrior sage on one shoulder and a prison captain on the other.
Yeah.
It sucks to be you if you get this one, but something's telling me bring more. Yeah. So I got a phone call from another big name. He said, hey, you're bringing in so-and-so and so-and-so. I said, yep. He goes, well, that makes 3 of you. That's a weird number. What? Let me guess. You're free that weekend.
Yeah.
Well, I am.
Let me self-invite myself.
Now we're up to 3 plus me. And I usually don't count myself in the instructor roster. And then I had a conversation with Chris's dad. We wound up talking about a different thing that led to me saying, hey, what you doing on such and such a date? And added him. And then there were 2 others that I felt I needed to bring. So the 2 went from 2 to 6. And every time I added, I went back to Maria and I'm like, hey, after the 3rd one, she's like, what? Jesus Christ. What? Tell me when you're done and you have a number. But if you think this will work, it will. Let's just do it. Because I told her many years ago, we've been married 21 years.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Add another couple. And I said, listen, this is what you married. You didn't marry a white belt. You married a lifer. And it's just the role I'm playing here. This is my job in terms of this is what I owe from, everything that's been given to me. I'm trying to give it back. So the camp happens, the tribute camp. It's wonderful. Long story short, the comments after the camp were not, are we doing another one? It was when.
Oh, that's cool.
I committed to every other year so that it doesn't get too common, and hopefully every other year would result in greater attendance. And long term, I said, the tribute camp was kind of a one-off for obvious reasons. So I needed to change the name. So myself, the master of Tappy Tappy, Roland Rivera, out of the Carolinas, we came up with Modern Arnis World Legacy Camp, and it fit. 2023, great turnout, but the communication amongst roughly a dozen or more of us, top-tiered first-generation Remy Presas students, started going up and becoming more frequent. We hit the legacy camp in 2023, and after that camp, the communication went up even higher and more frequent. And you're seeing more and more joint seminars amongst the OGs and Modern Arnis.
Yep.
You're seeing more posts where I'm posting. Any of them put up a flyer, I'll put it on my website.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then I say, hey guys, what do you say? I created the round table of Modern Arnis. There's no rank, there's no head of the table. I said, what if we start archiving for the public? And as a result of that, I created the evolution document, which includes a written curriculum of, a written list of the material professor taught, first person. And I put it out there so people would know what he taught. And I said to the folks, we're going to do a video to support the document. And we're in that process now. And that's proving to be some challenges. There's the website or the YouTube site. I said, there will be no innovations in these videos. It's only going to support the list of materials that we got from him first person. And something very interesting started happening is that even amongst the OGs, some of us have been with him 40 years. He turned some of them are saying, well, that's not how he taught me the 6 count.
Nope.
Okay. Well, that's not how we do the flow drill. Okay. I asked so-and-so to do the video on it. That's their version as was given to them. So, the videos are all being sent to Professor Dan Anderson, who's going to put like a title page and then fade into the video.
That's cool.
So he called me and was playfully complaining about how he playfully said, well, somebody put an ism in there and they innovated it. I said, were you there when Professor taught him? No. So we both did our version of these 2 basic drills that we learned over 40 years ago. And
before
we gave them to each other.
Camera.
We compared them. And he said, even we are doing them differently. I said, well, clearly you're doing them wrong. That went over like a fart in church. But we give each other a hard time. And then we said, listen, you've already touched on this. Professor taught almost on a day-by-day basis. Which way's the wind blowing? That's what he's teaching today. And if he's changed the material since the last time he taught it, well, he doesn't answer to anybody. So we have this phase 1 evolution document of material that he taught first person throughout the 80s, even into the 90s.
Okay, folks, welcome to the first Modern Arnis Roundtable discussion. I hope this is the first of many. And it is simply...
Then we have the second phase, which will be the video to support the document. Phase 3 is going to be taking one piece at a time, one bullet, and just letting all of the OGs let it rip. if they've innovated single Sinawali or the flow drill or the left to right tappy tappy. They're all stops are being taken out so people can see what professor taught first person at whatever point in time, and then see these innovations and see the true power and depth of modern Arnis. And what this is creating is a much more frequent, high-level interaction amongst about 15 of us.
Yeah.
And it's a privilege, truly a privilege, to be able to call these guys and girls and say, hey, Legacy Camp 2027, you in? Hell yeah, I'm in. They don't even ask questions anymore. Hey, I need you to do a video on this, and this for the Evolution Project. Okay, how long do I have? A month, 2, whatever. I think what's happened, he's been gone since August 01. Everyone's a little older, 24 years older. They're all doing their thing. They've all been doing their thing. They're willing to continue to keep doing what they're doing, but come together under that logo I sent you, which doesn't have any writing on purpose. I'm not starting another association or organization because we all know that's a shitstorm.
Yep.
I said, why don't roughly the round table is, I think, 16 deep. Why don't we just keep doing everything we're doing and yet work together? We created a website, modernarnisroundtable.com, where people can go to link to those YouTube videos you just posted, the evolution document. So it's a really good one-stop source for everything that's going on in Modern Arnis. And that may wind up piquing someone's interest to reach out to one of these instructors and say, hey, I'm up in your area. You're in my area. Can I come see you for a private? Or, can you do a seminar? Absolutely. You've got all 4 corners of the country represented, although not so much in the Southwest. But you have Dan and Kelly up in the Northwest.
That's my area. Yep.
In Northeast, you got my God, Bram and Chad and Bruce in Florida. Roland's in North Carolina. Dieter's over in Germany. Bambit and Renee are in the Philippines. Modern Arnis, at least here in the West, has never been stronger since COVID. It just unfortunately took us a whole long time to just calm down and just say, whoa, we can keep doing what we're doing, but we can also openly and publicly work together. And there's no argument over a unified curriculum. Let's just throw a list up of what Professor taught for those that never met him.
Yeah.
And, let's say somebody comes to the Legacy Camp and they've been training without really a specific instructor and they want to test. Well, we need to see what you've been using for curriculum. And if it's a decent representation of the professor, because some of us were with him for many, many years, we can really get a good feel for where you're at, what you're doing, and, kind of assess and see where you're at. Because when Professor passed, the entire hierarchy went with him because he was the entire hierarchy. Yeah. He's a one-man operation, and unfortunately, it's a single point failure. And unfortunately, it took 20 years in the nicest way for all of us to just really come together and just calm down. But I'll tell you what, be able to call any of these folks and say, hey, this is my next idea. I very seldom hear a no, unless someone's really busy professionally or they got health issues. Datu Kelly Warden can't travel cross country anymore. So I try to Zoom him in to have a meet and greet with the camp whenever I can. As with Bambit and Renee, I'm hoping to get both of them over here at some point, but that's a whole nother mess, especially now with all things visa and things US, but lots of connectivity at the top with Modern Arnis. It's unfortunate it took so long, but they're hungry for it.
I mean, the service that you and your peers are doing it's serving the community and makes FMA and Modern Arnis better for the community. And it's not self-serving, it's sacrifice, it's giving of. There obviously in the world there are people who are self-serving because they got to put bread on the table. I get it, I understand the hustle, you got to do it, but there's a point of like at the cost of both the legacy, the tradition, and the community to prop themselves up. And that, again, there's recent, and we've talked about this, people have been talking about this, there's an issue of a certain section of the community that is doing just that. And it's a problem. So, but what you guys are doing is a beautiful thing, because again, having a legacy document, having a living document that people can reference back to, this is how you have core instruction that can be built upon generation after generation after generation. Because being a student underneath GM Bobby, as I am also a student underneath Dr. Kelly Warden, is like GM Bobby with his curriculum, like you have his set levels 1 through 7, like it's a clear curriculum. And everybody should be to standard at that curriculum. After you hit your level 7, you can start adding the things that you already do anyways, but it still comes back to you still got to be able to do the base format of the curriculum of Balintawak. And Modern Arnis has that opportunity, but it has to come to the agreed upon curriculum. And I feel like the majority, like what you guys are doing by having a majority consensus of a curriculum living document, that helps create that opportunity of like, here's the foundation, and then you can grow with your different aspects and different trees. But the majority agreed upon helps establish that. And it's important. And it's also serving of the community and not self-serving.
Absolutely. You know, one of the greatest challenges for Balintawak will be when Bobby's no longer with us.
Yeah.
And I finally met him at his 70th birthday bash. I don't know what took me so long, but I met him. Of course, there's 150 of us there. Big pig roast. And of course, getting him alone was just not going to happen.
So he's to watch him do karaoke.
Yeah.
No, it's amazing. It's amazing, by the way.
But he's sitting down. I went up and I shook his hand and I said, GM Bobby, I said, I'm so sorry. I said, I'm nobody. I studied with Remy for 20 years. I've heard nothing but everything about you. And I finally wanted to meet you. So I'm holding his hand, which is the softest hand I think I've ever shook, which really freaked me out, being a 60-something plus veteran year stick fighter, right? He wouldn't let go of my hand. He wasn't crushing it, but he wouldn't let go. He held it for so long, about 5 or 10 minutes, I knelt to continue the conversation because I'm bent over, my back is spasming, right?
Yeah.
I said, I think this dude is sizing me up. In a good way. And I'm like, you're a giant, man. You're the only one that I will put at professor's level. The only one. And I've gotten abused by quite a few people over the years. Those guys, the thunder those two giants brought, is like nothing else. Taking nothing away from all these other folks. But these two guys are the giants among giants.
Yeah.
And I've met him several times since. I hope to see him again in June. He'll be 2 hours from me.
Oh, nice.
I pray that Balintawak doesn't suffer what Modern Arnis went through. It's human nature, but I've watched Bobby do his test, and he stands there.
Oh, yeah. It's something to behold and participate in.
I had to leave like 1 in the afternoon at his 70th birthday bash world camp because I had to get to the airport, and Roland was kind enough to get me out of there and get me over there on time. But I think he started at like 8 in the morning, and here he is at 1 o'clock. And he's nowhere near done. I think he's at level 4, and I'm thinking 6, 7, and that's when it gets longer with the 24 techniques. Talk about quality control. But you know, speaking with the OGs at the round table, Professor was in a constant state of learning and training and developing. He was like a sponge. And I said, listen, how can you take a snapshot of somebody like that? At what point is the best point to? You just got to come up with common ground.
It's a raindrop in the river and trying to catch that raindrop as it goes down the river and out to the sea. Good luck.
You got to find common ground. And I said, listen, let's just take, somebody just like Dan Anderson. He's been at it for 100 years. I write him hard because we're close friends. Yeah. Very close. And I said, how long, if you're watching somebody that you've never met, if they've been training in Modern Arnis for 10 years, and they're moving and training and performing and demonstrating at roughly peak capacity, say 60, 70%, and they're letting it rip like they're testing in front of the professor like we used to do in the 80s.
Mhm.
How long is it going to take you to figure out where they belong in terms of rank?
Right.
He said, a couple minutes. See this, and this, you'll know.
Yeah.
It's got decades in.
Yeah.
So long gone are the days of testing in front of the professor. But I said, guys, if we use a base core curriculum, which the Western mind really appreciates the black and white aspect of a curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things the masters were requesting of the masters when Professor died was, can you please draft a curriculum?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that needs to be rewritten, although I'm no longer part of the IMAF. I left 7 years ago. There's nothing wrong with it, but if the curriculum looks a little different from one OG to the next, that's not a bad thing. That's what the man wanted. He didn't want
different flavors. We're different people at different times of our life and to different people. So,
look at what Kelly brings to the table, his cross connections and his ability to connect the Jeet Kune Do with his Arnis, with all the other things he dealt with, Kui Braka and Professor Trigg and all the different flavors he brings. Oh my God.
Yep.
A true wealth of knowledge, and then you look at somebody like Ray with all his different diverse backgrounds with Kali and Arnis and Sayak, and Bruce has a unique background. Roland has a unique background. We all do. That curriculum should look a little different.
Mm-hmm.
And
again, if you're clones, then you're not growing. That is my primary issue when it comes to slaves to the curriculum. Is again, obligatory Dune quote, but stagnation is death and leads to total obliteration. You have to keep innovating. You have to keep adding to it, because if you're clones and slaves to the curriculum, the style, the method dies.
Yeah.
So it's important. It's necessary. And also it's necessary to accept, like, the man was also infallible. The man was a different person at every time of his life. And again, you're catching snapshots, like you said, and an ever-moving target. So
he was empowering. He had a tractor beam on him like nothing I've ever seen. Yep. Would remember names and things. And so, my God, Kurt, how are you? How was the wife? If you have a son and or a daughter, he would kind of remember who they were, what their sports they were in. He did this for everybody in the room, not just the host. I was like, I'm kind of trying to remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. His ability to retain personal information was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And as formidable as he was, he genuinely felt that human connection.
Yeah.
And I think it would have broken his heart. He died 10 days before 9/11.
Yeah.
I'm kind of glad, in a sense, he didn't see it.
Yeah.
Because imagine, here's this kid born and put in the mountains for 10 years because of the Japanese invasion of his home country, comes down and just is just living and surviving as he is. He leaves home as an adolescent, came back for a minute, left again at about 14 and never went back. And just traveled and looked for trouble and looked for skills and fighting and training and learning, and went to Cebu to see his uncle, who was a person of status that had a work license, the ability to issue a work license. But his uncle didn't want to deal with him because he knew he was a little bit of a troublemaker. So his uncle was wealthy enough to where he had bodyguards. So Professor goes to the store, gets a pipe and wraps it in newspaper, disguises it, mysteriously gets past all 4 bodyguards. And he said, listen, I need work. And he says, I'll tell you what, I won't even use Presas. I'll use Amador, his mother's maiden name. I'm Remy Amador, if that will appease you. And that's how Remy Amador Presas came to be, because that's all we knew him as. I didn't realize that Amador was his mother's maiden name. But trained, went from village to village, looking for trouble, looking for a fight, got in plenty of them. And after all those years, to see just how personable and gentle he could be was really a wonderful example for me to that phrase we talked about earlier about the more dangerous we become, the more gentle we must also become.
Yep.
He lived it. And none of us are perfect. Neither was he. But what an example. And, you get that phone call. I am at the airport. No warning. What do you mean you're at the airport? Which airport? The one right down the street from your house. Huh. Guess we have a house guest for the next week or the weekend, you know, and or once he does the seminar, you're not sure when he's leaving.
Yeah.
So yeah, never done that guy.
It is interesting the power and beauty that these men and women have in our lives. Mm-hmm. And the risk that we run into, of course, is the cult of personality. And then the attachment to said personality as one, awesome by association and validation and credentialing. But the other aspect of like seeing the human behind this person, behind this giant of a human being. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the beautiful part about being involved in this community, just or any community, but particular for FMA. It's beautiful to meet the human behind the stick, behind the knife. And that's where I find these podcasts are incredibly important because one, we get to live the stories as told by first generation and how many other generation of students from their perspective. And you get these little snapshots and snippets that are unique to them. Mm-hmm. And adds to the beautiful tapestry that is the love of these men and women, and clearly the love that is shown from them and from their students back to them. And it's the reciprocal cycle. And this is where, yeah, martial arts can be beautiful. Again, this is the point of have to do it or get to do it. And at this point of our life, we get to have the opportunity to talk about these things, reminisce, share some stories that are not so great, but again, it's part of that process of that impact and the affect and how we can lead for the next generation what should be better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Evolution Project is also setting the stage for the next generation because I'm trying to get as much information archived outside of the efforts of folks like Dr. Kelly and Professor Dan Anderson and Bram
Mm-hmm.
Frank that have written many books and many videos. Mm-hmm. Collectively come together and start archiving as much of it as possible so that when the next generation does take the wheel, whenever that may be, they'll at least have as much information as possible. Because when you have something like Edmund Parker, he passed December 1990, dropped that heart attack right after his annual physical, 59 years old.
Yep.
What a shitstorm. It went into chaos immediately. Nobody knew, including him, that he was going. Yep. So at least if we start archiving this stuff, it'll at least pave the way for the futures. But, you know, there's even been some extremely small-minded talk, and there's always going to be critiques out there. And, well, you're focusing too much on celebrating the legacy instead of the art. And I said, yeah, last I checked, something like the legacy camp, there's 21 to 24 hours of training. Mm-hmm. It's all day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Yeah. There's only one come together dinner, and that's usually on Saturday evening where we sit the whole camp down and offer to feed them. Yeah. For 2 to 3 hours of social time. Mm-hmm. So how is it that we're caught up in the past if we're actually training forward and evolving and learning and growing and sharing? We're reminiscing for a couple of hours, and there'll be a little story thrown in there when each on the floor. But I said, this is 21 to 24 hours of preserving the art and growing the art, and 2 to 3 hours of social family time. Yeah. And I said, that's not getting stuck in the past. We're doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing. We're doing what we should be doing, and we're doing what he wanted us to do. Because if you had spent any time with this guy, he would tell you, take my art and make it your own and spread it and share it. And
that right there is one of those hot topics that's been an interesting debate online. And I'm sure it's been a debate since day one of art within your art. And I mean, how can you not have an art within your art when, again, we just talked about this 10 minutes ago about core foundation, yes, is from the genius that was GM Remy, but every person's unique to themselves and does things every slightly different. And so, of course, they're going to make it themselves. It's not like you can delete all the stuff that you did before and just stay completely in that and only be in that forever. So, yeah.
You think about this. When you buy something on Amazon, well, things might be a little sparser where you live, but I can go to Staples or Kohl's. Kohl's is a department store out here.
Yep.
And bring my Amazon item to the counter and get the slip and haul ass.
Yep.
So Amazon has inserted themselves in other businesses.
Yep.
Professor inserted himself in schools across the country starting in the mid-70s.
Which is genius.
He wasn't trying to open schools.
No.
He was trying to get his foot in the door and basically going to beat the shit out of the owner to win their interest and then start a program. So this dude was doing what 50 years ago what Amazon is doing today.
Yeah.
And how did he do it? It became kind of a marketing thing. Mike Raplogo out of California, right around 80, 81, dubbed it as this is becoming the art within your art because he's not trying to open up a chain of schools. But you keep doing what you're doing, whatever your primary system is. He said, just please let me add my thing. And he says, you'll get better at what you're already doing. Yeah. That's the whole spinoff on the art within your art. And there is, there's another vein out there that says, well, I teach pure Arnis. No, you don't. That kept changing constantly.
Yep.
And again, all you got to do is watch the videos from the 80s to the 13 years later to the 98 Victoria tapes. You're going to see a very different application of many different things. He got better.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. He got smarter. He kept absorbing and pulling stuff. If you showed up at a seminar and you were a person of skill, he'd watch you and he'd be watching what you're doing and he's going to mimic some of that. If you had an armbar that he had never seen before or just a different application or an entry, you can bet he's taking it. He'll pocket it and regurgitate it later.
All right, continue on. Art within your art, not inserting into schools, not trying to.
Yep.
Yeah.
He knew he wasn't looking to open a chain of schools, but he needed to get his foot in the door because his ultimate goal was to make Modern Arnis the martial art of the world. So he was doing 50 years ago what Amazon is doing today.
Yeah.
And no, he didn't want robots. He wanted you to take it. And for anyone that trained with him closely, he said, take your art, take my art and make it your own and spread it and share it. And, this whole art within your art, it kind of came a marketing thing right around 80, 81, and it stuck. And there was a very short-lived debate about some people claim they teach pure Arnis. No, you don't. This thing changed almost daily with this guy, and I almost got killed for it because I got my first 3 empty hand forms directly from the professor. And again, I'm 15, 16 years old. I'm studying Kenpo, which has a bunch of forms.
Oh, yeah.
He teaches them to me. They're not very long. He wants to see him, 6 months later, a year later. So I do them for him. He got pissed. He got mad. And Sifu Lee is in the back room in the office, and the walls didn't go all the way to the suspended ceiling so you could hear it, thank God. He hears Professor's voice. He comes trotting out, hey, guys, what's going on? And I'm like, he's mad. And I don't want to actually say because he's standing right there looking at me. I said he's mad because the form isn't right. But so Sifu says, Brian, let me see. So I did him. He goes, hey, Brian, you know what? Why don't you go upstairs? I'll catch up with you later. I ran the hell out of that room like my life wasn't depending on it. So again, Professor eventually leaves town. Sifu sits me down. And he said, and I before I left the room, Professor Sifu told me, he said, you're doing them the right way. So now I'm technically off the hook, I think. I'm gone. He sits me down a day or two later, and he said, listen, you did the forms the way you were taught, because I got them the same way, he said. But understand, you're dealing with the founder of the system. Whether he changed them conscientiously or he forgot them and he reinvented them, doesn't matter. He's the boss. What he says goes. You don't have to like it. This is reality. So if this ever comes up again, be it a technique, a form, a knife, a stick, an empty hand, if it's changed and he says you're doing it wrong, just say, yes, sir.
Check, Roger, let's go.
Brian, do you understand me? Yes, sir. And I never forgot that, because sure than shit, all those years later, 17, 18 years worth, up until he passed, or really until he got sick at the end of 2000, everything, not everything, but a whole bunch of stuff changed. Even his armbar. In the 80s, his armbar, he'd grab your wrist and he'd put his wrist on your elbow. As he got older, his placement changed up to here.
Yeah.
That's structural. That don't bend. This is bicep or tricep, right? But it also brought you closer into his core, where we're stronger as he gets older. Makes perfectly good sense. He just never told us. He just did it. So you watch his armbar from the 80s to the 90s, same armbar, but not really.
Yeah.
So there's what's pure Arnis, nobody knows, because he kept changing it. And again, which snapshot are you going to take?
It's the old man, young man methodology, because all of us of a certain age, I mean, all of us who've been at this for a while, like there's things that we did as young men and young women that we clearly can't not do as older individuals. So we have to modify and adjust. It's just, again, the critical thinking aspect here for both student, observer, and even instructor, legacy instructor, lineage holder instructor. Like they have to make that acknowledgement of like different people at different times. So of course the art's going to evolve, and that's the inherent process and necessary process, because again, stagnation is death and leads to total obliteration. You got to keep moving forward. And as like the cultural aspect, again, we're trying to preserve certain aspects of the culture of the curriculum, but that's a snapshot of what was at a very specific tailored point. But if you're living the culture, you're creating inherently something new as a hybrid between the two. So acknowledging that fact, I don't know why certain people don't acknowledge that, even though it's the truth, that cognitive dissonance. But I feel, again, it's for people who are trying to do as a stakeholder, as the self-serving, look at me, make my business great, and not helping the community. Because it leads to like the further discussion. I don't know how much time we got left, but like this discussion of, do you need Arnis, FMA, whatever? Do you need schools, or do you need programs within schools?
Right. Both would be ideal. And the biggest thing that we're facing, as probably most are not getting, the average age of the most practitioners is getting older and older. The young ones just don't seem interested. But the coming together of so many of the first generation folks, overwhelming majority of them, the oldest one just turned 80. Won't say his name because I don't know if it's public, but he just turned 80.
Yeah.
And I think Roland Rivera, myself, and Chad Bailey were all damn near the same age at 57. So there's that range of the top tier of the round table. And I see with so much connectivity, at least establishing as much as we can moving forward. You know, look at how many schools we lost in this country because of COVID.
Mine included.
A lot. Okay, there you go.
Not because of COVID, but COVID would have killed my school. Mine closed for other reasons. But yeah, COVID would have killed my school.
Yeah. So, you know, and I don't know of very many people making a good living in the martial arts that without a business model. I know of a very successful school up in Washington State that I was recently at. They're really into it. It's a husband and wife team, and they are very good at what they do, but it is absolutely being run as a business. I got to say the quality of students I was very pleased with when I was there, because you don't always see that. It's the kids classes are going to pay to rent. It's that simple, you know. Making a living in the martial arts has never been easy. And I look at guys like Kelly and Dan and Bram, and I'm like, wow, these guys at it for decades, you know. And the old saying, do what you love and the money will take care of itself. Well, I do believe that was the case in the 80s and the 90s. But since then,
no,
it's much, much more rare. You know, and when you look at these giants, not so much the level of Professor and GM Bobby, but you look at these lifers, Dan and Bram and Kelly, that have been at it for decades.
Mm-hmm.
They're still going, and it's getting a little harder because obviously the years are creeping up on them. Dan just retired from the school after 40 years, but he's still going to teach the Arnis and do the book work and the video work. But it has not been easy for these guys all these years.
No.
You know, and that speaks to what you were saying earlier. Some do it for a living. They have to, excuse me, they choose to do it, but they have to do it because that's their primary income. Others have a choice. Others use it as a hobby. Others have worked through, and now their primary career is over, and now they're fully engaged by choice, not by necessity. So I'm very thankful that the choices that I made. I didn't necessarily know exactly what I was doing and the future consequences at the time. I knew there would be a pension to be had in corrections, but how actively aware was I at the time? I wasn't. In hindsight now, oh my God, what a blessing.
Yeah.
But I tip my hand to anyone that's a full-time martial artist, whether they run a school, a brick and mortar school, or they're on doing the seminars, or they're producing blades or training equipment, videos, books, whatever. And you talk about having to go at it damn near 7 days a week.
Yeah.
You know, so the thought of future Arnis schools, I can only hope that we can keep this going with that art within your art approach, meaning that extra program at the local school. Dan is going to be teaching at a Taekwondo school in Gresham.
Yeah. Yep.
Because he needs a space, and makes sense. But that's how we got to this point. And I'm hoping if enough of us are doing it, that there's enough of programs out there, be it a club or a program within a school, we can carve out enough of a niche to keep this thing going. No, it's a conundrum. It's always been a conundrum, but the stakes are so much higher in this day and age with the economy and everything. I just hope there's enough of an interest there, and we can somehow figure out how to ignite the interest of the youngsters.
Honestly, twofold that I look at is one, FMA is always going to work against the issue of without a competitive outlet, it's going to take a second seat to boxing, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, period, MMA, period. Because trying to sell it to parents is like this obscure 1% of the 1%. Best of luck. Because I remember competing back in the 2000s at NASCA. I was one of two people doing open stick forms at these international level tournaments. So, and the other place where I see FMA really gain its highlight and showcasing is actually in the stunt community. Because these people want to learn this stuff to make it look good because it's professionally necessary for their work, and they're not actually having to use it. So they have the opportunity to let it grow and inspire, where you get to see it all over the place. As in the day in, day out, actually going to utilize it in the field as a profession of arms. Again, small cross section, but for the public inspirational aspect, yeah, stunt community, because we don't have the combat sports community because it's just not going to happen, unfortunately.
Right.
It's the stunt community that can see where FMA moves forward, and by extension, Modern Arnis. And when I see like the youngsters, guys kind of my age and younger, or like the three of them keep pushing it forward. I mean, shout out to Chris Chu, Cameron Bird, and Noah King. Like those three guys, like they're pushing it, and at a bit of a resistance of some other people in the older generation, trying to put them underneath their guidance, thereby controlling their growth. But like it's those guys that is seeing moving forward. But there's also like that hybrid generation in between, like Gruturu, Kuroge, Belton Lubis, my instructor, who Datu Kelly has said quite publicly he's going to pass his Datu title on to him when he fully retires. But even then, Belton is a multifaceted martial artist who does everything. So it's inherent. It's just what's going to happen is you have Modern Arnis core, but you're going to do everything else. So at least this discussion from this other side of, is it truly Modern Arnis? And the answer is yes, because it's just the nature of the beast.
You know, and look at how diverse Kelly's background is.
Oh yeah.
And Elton's background is different. It just includes what Kelly's been teaching. And Belton a couple times, and I said, he told me, I'm not sure who told me, if it was Kelly or Belton, but that Belton would be the heir to the tattoo title.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, listen, I have plenty of fire left in me. He said, someday, whenever that may be, hopefully it's no time soon when we don't have Kelly anymore. I said, I'll be more than happy to stand beside you and do whatever we can.
Yep.
Humble, highly skilled, personable. He's got all the tools, personally and professionally.
Yep.
But yes, that will change that aspect of Modern Arnis. I've tweaked it. I got harassed and stalked for about 6 years because I was told you've innovated between your Kenpo, not so much the Kenpo, but your tactical training, your little bit of Tai Chi and boxing. I've never competed in the ring. And your Arnis, you're not just teaching what Professor gave you. He said, you need to label it and get it out there and take the title Grandmaster. And I playfully say I got stalked and harassed for 6 years by 2 other Grandmasters. And finally got tired of hearing about it because the first one recruited the second one who's got an even bigger voice to tag team. And I finally just gave in. And I said, what's the difference? It's only a title. He goes, yeah, you don't understand the level that you're dealing with here and affect that you can have by doing this. He says, we got 15 years on you. Just shut up and do it. So I finally acquiesced. Of course, I reduced it to GMZ because I'm not big on titles. The biggest, most important title I think I have in my life is hands down is dad.
Yeah.
The rest are cool, but you're a dad yourself. So, internal affairs captain and this and that and grandmaster and Lakan, Sampu and all that. Those are wonderful things. But the real ones, man, DAD. But I finally caved in and started to grow into that role. And it's been a hell of a journey, a very rewarding journey, but learning more about people, about yourself, and realizing what's more important is the people within these arts and systems. And regardless of why anyone's training, that personal connection was far stronger than any connection we had on the mat with the professor.
Yeah.
It was very, the connection on the mat was obviously very physical and martial, but that personal connection that he made, it was, he put his heart and soul into every single teaching event. Yeah. He taught every single class personally, unless he was injured or sick. And, again, hell of a role model, not saying he was perfect because he wasn't. I know there's a lot of people out there that have some sour grapes having had dealt with him. I get it. We're human. But that personal connection was powerful, and it speaks to tying all of this together. And hopefully, even though it's going to change as the generations change, and like we said, Belton's background versus Kelly's background, Belton will take it in his direction, and I'm completely confident he's going to rock it. But that has to be, that's part of the evolution. That's the learning. This cookie cutter ain't going to cut it. So I've learned to embrace these differences and welcome them instead of saying, well, that's not really how we do it. It doesn't matter if that's how we do it. Your instructor and his influence, is going to be a little bit different than the next person's. And when you have something this big that's literally worldwide, both in Bobby's case and Professor's case, you've got different cultural people converging. They do things differently. I don't know if you know the name Dieter Knuddel, Grandmaster Dieter. Yep. He's got curriculum up to and including 10th degree.
Yep.
Written.
Yep.
Who does that? I've had the privilege of sitting on a couple of testing boards with him. Dan and I one year walked for 3 hours up and down the floor. You had white belts down that end. You had 5th degrees was the highest level testing down that end. And there were groups for each. And we got to watch for 3 hours go back and forth. So I says, you've got actual curriculum above black and 1st and 2nd and 3rd. He goes, oh yeah, all the way up to 10th. Wow. Right? You talk about literally systemic, organized. And when I was with him at his summer camp 2 years ago, they had a board meeting just for curriculum. It took like 4 or 5 hours. They rehashed on video the changes they were making for the curriculum for that year.
I mean, that's an academic process that helps minimize the mystique, the lies, and the anecdotal misunderstandings of a historical oral tradition. Yes, necessary.
His in-house summer camp is every other year. Normally, there's 200 people there.
Mm-hmm.
They were down to about 140. His group took a beating, size-wise, since COVID, and they lost roughly a third, at least at the summer camp. I don't know what their overall numbers are, but still 140 people for 6 days of training.
Mm-hmm.
It is very impressive. And you talk about running like on a clock. Don't be late. When they say they start at 9, they're not starting at 9:01. They're starting at 9.
Yeah, it's not Filipino time; it's German time.
Breakfast at 7:30, and you're in a cafeteria, a nice one. They're using a former national football training complex, soccer.
Yeah,
and I'm thinking breakfast. People start rolling in at 8 o'clock. Yeah, no, there was a line at 7:30. I'm like, oh, you're not sleeping in, bro. Get going.
That's awesome too.
Very systemic. A little more loosely formatted in the Philippines, but I'm very close with Bambit Dulay and Renee Tongson. Bambit is their chief instructor. Renee has his Tres Puntas. Bambit has Master of Tappy Tappy International.
Mm-hmm.
Tappy Tappy International. Maddie. Both doing a great job out there and more than willing to work every time I reach out to them. What can we do? And, this is this. And I said, when your flyer is ready, which it's almost ready for FMA 11, the FMA festival is every other year opposite the Legacy Camp. I always make a big banner flyer of their flyer, their banner. I make a banner of their flyer and I hang it at Legacy Camp.
Yeah.
And I said, that's the least I can do to try and get people to go, because I don't know if you've ever trained in FMA on native soil, but man, it's different.
I will be in November for World Camp 2025 with GM Remy.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. I can't explain it. You're about to find out. And I'll tell you what, it was a real treat. I've only had the opportunity to go twice. I have a standing open invitation to go see those guys, but it's a big thing. It's a lot involved going over there. Of course, the last time I went, there might have been a hotel fire, and Dieter and I got in. We were both. I was grounded when I got home from that trip. We were never in physical danger because we saw the smoke coming through the hallway from the casino into the hotel area. And we just trotted outside, but he's taking pictures outside the hotel on a Sunday morning. There's flames in the background. The fire trucks are showing up. These guys roll up with coffees in their sandals because they're not professional. They just pour water from the outside. They don't go in like we do in this country. They don't have the training or the technology. So he's snapping pictures and posting them. Dieter, what are you doing? You're on Facebook with my wife. She'll kill us both. I haven't talked to her yet. And he's like, this is good stuff, because Dieter is a professional photographer.
Yeah.
He take pictures like none other. And he just click. Oh, fuck. Took me, I don't know how many days to calm my queen down. And then when I get home, she goes, I know your ranks and your titles. You're grounded. You will never travel with him unsupervised again.
So this is that was a segue for her to come with you. Anyway,
yeah, but the Philippines is on literally the other side of the planet, further for you. And I'm like, I won't put her through it, but I'm not so sure. She didn't want me to go back a second time because it's so far away, and she just doesn't really know what's going on over there. Now, oh my God, I don't know what it's going to cost me to go back again.
Yeah, we're spending my 40th there, bringing my entire family. This will actually be the first time I've gone home since we left in '89 after Marcos. Yeah, we're retracing a lot of my adoption stuff while we're there. So we're going to spend a full month bounce between the Philippines and Japan. So
good for
fun.
you.
Yeah,
good for you.
Big going home. And interesting enough, like G and Bobby, our birthdays are like within days of each other. So yeah, it'll be fun.
You're just half his age.
And
almost.
And from Iloilo anyway, so I mean, there's like related somehow by blood. not saying that I am, but like all Filipinos like related somehow, that connection.
Yeah.
It's funny.
I still can't get over his speed at this age.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
He wanted me to disarm him during a demo when I saw him last summer, and you were never allowed to disarm the professor
unless he says to do it.
And even then, you're absolutely correct. But even then, it was almost never.
Yeah.
And here, Bobby pulls me up to do one, and I'm like, I'm just being ginger with him because, again, Professor's gone 25 years. So Professor was what, 62? Bobby was 75. I'm touching hands with him, being respectful of it. And he's like, you do it. And I'm looking at him like, this is a setup. I know it is. But that is so awesome that you're going and you're able to spend that much time and do exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
The
it's been a long time coming.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
Good. You should. How long? You said you'll be about a month?
Yeah.
Good for you.
Going to try to hit Luzon and bounce up. So when my parents, my adoptive parents were Air Force stationed there at Clark back in the 80s. This is actually part of that segue of the story. So my dad was part of the intel mission, helping certain elements of the general population help remove Marcos from power. So it may have been involved in certain things where we got shot at as the process, but stationed there in Angeles City or there at Clark Air Base. But like the majority of my upbringing was there. I have distinct memories of being up in Baguio, someone to treat up to that. But come to find out with 23andMe and like finding Aunt's blood, all my blood that realistically have connection to is there in Iloilo. And come to find out, I like within the FMA community, I got cousins by way of that. So I'm going to spend a lot of time down there. I'm really hoping to get up to Luzon and spend time there.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I've resigned my fact that like I'm never gonna find my parents, which is fine. It's just matter of fact. But like more specifically, like my mother, because my mother was a prostitute and I was literally born in a brothel. So like I'm not gonna find anything there. But spending time in the Visayas, it'll be fine.
Awesome. And I believe it's in Cebu, right?
Yeah.
Cebu is central to southern Visayas.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Do you remember the name growing up as a kid, Mike Stone?
Maybe.
He earned his black belt in like 6 months. He's just a master, and he tore open some of the tournament circuit.
Yeah.
He disappeared years ago. Just stopped. He's in his 70s. I remember reading about him in some of the earlier martial arts encyclopedias back in the 70s and 80s. It wouldn't be the 70s for me. It would have been the 80s. Phenomenal competitor. Big name back then.
Mm-hmm. Because
of the fire in 2018, Dieter and I eventually got all of our gear back. We were delayed 2 days in Manila before we went to Bohol, which is kind of on the border of Visayas and Mindanao. And we get there, and this dude runs up to me and hands me a plastic grocery bag with shirts in it.
Yeah.
And they said, so-and-so, somebody wanted you to have these because obviously your clothes need laundering and blah, 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 blah. I weren't sure how much you lost. And he said, I said, who is it? And he says, don't worry about it. His name's on one of the shirts. It was Mike Stone.
Mike Stone. I'll have to
he
look that one up.
Into Bohol.
Okay.
And is just living large. I finally got to meet him. He showed up for the gala event. 6'1", 6'2", slim, tan, $1 million smile, relaxed. And I'm like, sir, how long have you been here? And he goes, knock the sir off. I'm retired. And he said, how are you guys doing? I said, we're doing all right. We got all our stuff. It's going to take a while for the laundry to get the smell out of it, but we're good. We didn't really lose anything. And he said, well, I'm just trying to help out. But of what's the chances of this dude being an American and having retired had to be 30 years ago. Dropped off the map, found a place to call home, a beautiful island, and crossing paths with him given those circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah.
Freaking awesome.
That is awesome. I mean, that's the cool thing about like the FMA community, especially online, is we are such a small community that we have a lot of like interaction, and you can throw up the bolo and say, "Hey, I'm in town, rally the homies," and we can all show up. And that's the real opportunity that we have to grow and build a lot of strength. But it's also a dangerous space when we mess up. We have this accountability across the board in such a small pond. So yeah.
And the cool thing is we're worldwide.
Yeah.
We're everywhere.
Yep.
And you know, somebody, I'm sure you've heard of FMA discussion.
Oh, yeah. Maybe, yeah, a little bit.
Dean, I don't know who contacted who, doesn't matter. But Dean had me on a couple times for different reasons, a couple different people, and then once myself. He said, Dean lives less than 1 hour from where I'm sitting.
Right.
He goes, you're telling me there was Modern Arnis in Connecticut in 1982? Yep. He didn't know about until the 90s.
Yeah.
He goes, how did I not know this? I said, Dean, I says, it's easy for me to say you're old, even though I'm older than him. I said, we had yellow pages. We had phone book. And no internet. How are we communicating? Written mail and telephone.
Yep.
How were you supposed to know? We sent out mailings. We didn't send out emails.
No.
And the emails really didn't start until 92, 93. But as entrenched as he was all those years, he never realized there was that level of FMA activity an hour from his house. Just don't know.
You just don't know what you don't know. And also, if you're not looking, you don't find it. And on top of all that, some people are really good at hiding. Because like here in Homer, actually just recently, one of the Sarada instructors moved here in town. I connected with him a few years ago, but like for the longest time, I was the only FMA guy, especially here on the peninsula. Now here in the state, there's like 6 of us because you got Pakiti Tercio with Jason Nardi down in Juneau. You have Balintawak up in Anchorage with Dr. Hugh. You got me down here. I think there's a Doce Pares guy up in Anchorage. And then here in Homer, town of 5,000, there's me and GM Virgil, who it's like, well, what are the odds?
Awesome.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's been an amazing journey. Very thankful. Trying to put in more than I got out of it, and that's no small task. It's been good to me. A lot of painful lessons, but you know, we live and learn. And very thankful to be where I'm at with all of these amazing people around, working together. You know, and all my events, I tell them all the same thing, and they know this because most of the roundtable folks have already been to Connecticut to teach. I said, listen, same thing applies. Leave your attitudes and your egos at the door. You can pick up a couple when you leave, but there was no issues when Professor was teaching. You were there to listen to him and participate. We were all doing the same thing at the same time. And I said, we're going to keep doing that. All instructors are required to be present throughout the seminar. You're not going to come down and just teach and disappear again. I'm not saying they need to be on the floor. I'm saying all y'all need to be there.
Yep.
You can peddle your wares between sessions or during lunch or dinner, but we're not giving private lessons while there's an actual class going on. That ain't happening. If you want to get there early or stay late, hell, you can go to my house if there's no room at the hotel. I'll help you, but we're not compromising the workouts, the official workouts. And I said, I'm simply doing what the professor did because when we're all there doing the same thing together, the energy is higher.
Yeah.
There's no breakout sessions. There's no side conversations. And I said, if anyone has an issue with it, please let me know. I'll hear you out. Probably not going to go along with it. I'll at least listen to you. But they said, dude, we get it. We get it. And I said, you know, even if there's 2 instructors talking off to the side, just freaking wait till the instructor sends them back out to work on the next technique and then keep jaw jacking. It's okay. Just don't do it while this so-and-so is talking. and they're just so wonderful to work with. And again, I think, time has passed 20 plus years. Clock's ticking, or none of us are getting younger. And there's a real good opportunity to come together and at least, if nothing else, do the best we can, but also set the stage for the future. Because like I said, the oldest of the round table is 80.
Yeah.
That's almost old.
Yeah, just about. Just about.
So life is good.
It's awesome. Well, I appreciate your dedicated service. And I know the community is appreciative of your dedicated service and continued service to keep pushing this forward and not letting this beautiful gift that GM Remy gave to the world, like outside of the circle, like of FMA, like people don't understand like his importance as to like how martial arts evolved in the States and more importantly the world. Because it's undescribable of like the level of impact. And more so with the continuation of that influence through his students and seniors that keep pushing this forward. So I appreciate you doing that because without it, it goes away. We need it.
Yeah. I can't thank you enough for your time, and please keep doing what you're doing. Enjoy your time in the Philippines. Hopefully it's well worth your time and in here. Hopefully get some training time in. I can't imagine what it would be like training with Bobby on native soil.
Oh, it's good. I'm looking forward to it. I only get to see him, GM Bobby, maybe once or twice a year when I go down to Seattle. I get to see Dr. Kelly about the same amount because they're both there for camps. So, but like this level of like everybody's going to be there, this is going to be something else. So
good. Looking forward to living vicariously through yourself, and I'm not sure who else is going. I haven't asked yet, but I know there's quite a few people like, yep, I'm in.
Yep.
So hopefully somebody will do some posting of photos or videos, and I can tell it's going to be an awesome event.
I might do an episode out there if I'm given the opportunity or just if I'm allowed to. So I'll definitely do like a couple of video blogs while I'm there.
Awesome. I hope so. That'd be great.
Yeah. Well, fun. Well, we've been at this almost 3 hours. I know you have to get going to things. I would love to bring you back on. We talked a lot about history and connection with Remy. I also would like to dive back into some of the more law enforcement stuff because I find I've used this phrase and I've gotten some crap about it, but I want to listen to people about killing from killers. And it goes from both sides of the aspect of people who have had to deal with those people and people who have actually done it, because it helps dissuade some of the romanticism and fantasy that we often see in our community. Because I would love to talk about is the reasons why some people, to include myself, teach offensive knife and why that is a problem for certain. And obviously the legal situation there, because the legal aspect does not get talked about enough in the community, documented, and it needs to be.
I agree.
So for part 2, I would love to do that.
Absolutely. I've always got something going on, but I'm never too busy to help somebody out, especially when good people are doing the right thing for the right reasons. So a little bit of notice and I will make time for you anytime. Cool.
I appreciate you and appreciate what you continue to do. So yes, thank you for the gift of your time. And I'm going to drop you back down with say my goodbyes to the community. And just hang out in the lobby real quick if you don't mind. All right.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. All right, everybody. That was 2.5 hours. Yeah. It's hard to describe like the amount of data that just came through in this conversation. I'm a little out of practice, like talking on the cuff like this, but like, dude, there was so much that was going on in this conversation and just in the bigger impact of what it entails. So like everything else, apologies for the little hiccups in the beginning and whatnot, but I'm going to edit this in post. So everybody have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Keep training, keep sharing, keep doing all the things. Help me with the podcast by sharing it and all those things. But in the meantime, have a wonderful day and I'll catch everybody later. Bye.